Welcome back to the Sunday Briefing. I'm Peter Ducey. Some breaking news this morning. The UK and Canada and Australia have all announced today they are formally recognizing a state of Palestine. That's something we just asked the UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer about. If you feel so strongly about officially recognizing Palestine for statehood, why are you waiting for President Trump to leave the country? Why can't you just do it right now? And isn't there a risk in rewarding Hamas with that?
Well, let me be really clear about Hamas. They're a terrorist organization who can have no part in any future governance in Palestine.
Joining us live from the site of Charlie Kirk's memorial in Arizona, Daily Wire co-founder and author of Lions and Scavengers, Ben Shapiro. And Ben, we will talk about the memorial, but first I want to get to this breaking news and the question to Starmer the other day. You know, as I was leaving Heathrow Airport, this friendly-looking old English guy put his finger in my face and said that I was rude to the Prime Minister. Is it rude to ask why he was so uncomfortable making this announcement next to an American president?
Not even remotely. It's exactly the right question. The President of the United States has had absolute moral clarity on this issue. Keir Starmer, Mark Carney, Albanese in Australia have anything but. And you can hear from Keir Starmer there exactly why, because there is no way to quote-unquote recognize a state of Palestine, a country that has no borders, no government, and apparently no responsibility for the health and well-being of its own citizens without actually rewarding Hamas, which is currently holding at least 40 hostages, possibly 20 of them alive, and could end the war at any minute simply by surrendering those hostages. So they're handing a giant reward to terrorists in the middle of a war that Israel is fighting against a terror group that Starmer himself says has to be extirpated.
And so if that's not going to get us closer to a ceasefire and peace, what is?
I mean, the only thing that's going to bring anything closer to a peace is actual military pressure and or victory. And the President of the United States knows that. I believe that the government of Israel knows that. I think even countries in the region know that, which is why there was very heavy pressure even a couple of months ago on Hamas to give up the hostages. And that was scuttled by Emmanuel Macron, the French prime minister, stepping in and saying that he wanted to recognize the state of Palestine. So every time it seems that a war is going to end in the Middle East, the Europeans immediately step in with the help of the Canadians and the Australians and hand rewards to terrorists, granting them the additional impetus to continue the war.
Ben, you're joining us from Charlie Kirk's memorial service. It's a tough day for a country that has been hurting for the last week and a half. Do you get the sense so far, a couple hours before it starts, that it's more like a funeral or more like a celebration?
I think it's clearly a celebration. I mean, everyone is obviously devastated. There's a lot of grieving going on. But through the tears, there are a lot of memories and a lot of determination to take Charlie's legacy and build on it. And that's the theme that TPUSA has announced, is building a legacy. It's not just about what Charlie already built. It's about going on to build. And that's something that his widow, Erica, who's an amazing person, who's taking over the organization as the CEO, that she is determined to do, is to take Charlie's legacy and carry it forward and exponentially grow what he was already in the process of building. So
it'll be a great celebration of Charlie's life. There's not been much healing in the last week and a half since he was killed. Here on Capitol Hill, there was this resolution to honor his life and his legacy. 58 Democrats voted no. 38 Democrats voted present. What does that tell you about the places that things are headed?
I don't think we're headed anyplace good. I think that a huge chunk of the left truly does believe in a permission structure for violence, that if you believe the wrong things, sure, we'll condemn violence when it happens, but underneath that, we sort of understand why the violence occurred, because, of course, Charlie was a hateful man, as the shooter and apparently many on the Democratic left keep saying. That sort of logic is not going to lead to the kind of conciliation or unity that Charlie actually spent his life fighting for. Again, Charlie was a person who went on these college campuses and faced down people who disagreed with them in the kindest, gentlest, and I think most conciliatory way. He heard their arguments, he argued with them. That's what America, I thought, was supposed to be about. Apparently, there are some people who believe differently. They tend to reside mostly on the left.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been talking about this. She thinks the White House now and the administration are taking advantage of people's sorrow about Charlie Kirk's assassination in this soundbite. Listen here.
It is equally important that Congress does unite to reject the government's attempt to weaponize this moment into an all-out assault on free speech across the country, all in the name of Charlie Kirk. This is a disgusting attack on the American people and the very First Amendment rights that define us as a country.
Is that what's happening here? Is Charlie Kirk's life and legacy being manipulated by an administration that is packed with people who knew him and who admired him?
I think that the people in the administration who knew Charlie really, really well would be devastated to think that they were somehow betraying his legacy by cracking down on free speech, which is something that Charlie argued for every single day. And I will note that there is a vast gap between the amount of shock and horror that many Democrats are showing toward, for example, the cancellation or suspension of Jimmy Kimmel versus the actual shooting death of our friend Charlie.
There are 200,000 people who responded that they wanted tickets to this memorial that you're outside of right now. The arena only holds 63,000. A lot of the line of succession are going to be there. The Washington Post says the Senate Pro Tem Grassley and the Commerce Secretary and the Treasury Secretary have stayed behind. Would all of these people, though, be in office today, serving a President Trump for the second time, if it wasn't for Charlie?
I think it's very difficult to say. I mean, the fact is that the election, despite, sort of all reports, was a lot closer than people seem to remember. And Charlie made a huge difference on the ground. I mean, it was Charlie's data collection in a lot of the swing states, places like Arizona, that was leading the Trump campaign to actually deploy its resources in different ways. It was Charlie's on-the-ground campaign. It was his registration of voters in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. That was making a huge difference in these places. So while you hate to attribute the president's victory to any one person other than the president of the United States, it was a collective effort, and any missing piece, including a huge piece like Charlie, would have certainly made some difference.
So a year from now, what will Charlie Kirk's legacy be?
I think Charlie's legacy will be in death the same as it was in life, but significantly, significantly larger. And that will be the thought of him on campuses having open, robust discussions, convincing people, because Charlie was about convincing people that the conservative way of thinking, the biblical way of thinking, was correct. And he spent his life pursuing that. He also happened to be behind the scenes an unbelievably good coalition builder. And so I think that is going to be part of his legacy as well. It's an important legacy and one we all ought to remember.
A big part of this story today is the security. It's being described as Super Bowl level security. There are 500 to 800 Secret Service agents deployed, but there was also a guy arrested there with a gun and a knife yesterday from where you were sitting. Does it feel safe?
I mean, I think it feels safe, but this is sort of the problem in the country right now. What does feel totally safe? Again, Charlie spent an awful lot of time on campuses. He had a security team, and obviously Charlie wasn't safe. So I think that a lot of the feelings of insecurity and vulnerability, sure, you have amazing security, but if we live in a country where we all feel, if you speak politically, that somehow you have to look over your shoulder, that's simply not good enough. It's why the entire nature of the debate in the country has to change.
Thank you, Ben. And if you could hang on for just a few minutes, Ben is going to join us again for the end of the show from Charlie Kirk's memorial service next.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.